Sci-Fi Audio presents Himmler's War by Robert Conroy, narrated by L.J. Ganser. This novel begins with a brief introduction by the author. To humanity's dismay and grief, Adolf Hitler lived a charmed life. He could have died of wounds suffered in the First World War, yet lived on to establish the ghastly Third Reich, create the Holocaust, and initiate World War II, which then resulted in the Cold War and so forth. There were more than 40 attempts on his life, some absurd and some very near misses, and yet he survived them all. The most famous attempt was the conspiracy involving Klaus von Stauffenberg on July 20th, 1944, and this attempt arguably came closest to succeeding. However, a badly injured Hitler lived on, dragging out the war in an orgy of killing until committing suicide in a dank bunker in Berlin in April 1945. But what if Hitler was killed not by an assassin, but in an act of war? And what if that act was largely unexpected and accidental? It would have resulted in enormous unanticipated consequences. With Hitler gone, what happens to the Allies' policy of unconditional surrender? Without Hitler's nearly insane interference, would the German generals have fought a more intelligent war, causing massive and unendurable Allied casualties? This, of course, is the premise of Himmler's War. Instead of his committing suicide in the spring of 1945, my novel has Hitler dying a messy death in the summer of 1944, a full month before von Stauffenberg's conspirators would have been in place to effect a coup. As chaos reigns, a new leader has to step forward in Germany, and, in this novel, it is the murderous and sinister Heinrich Himmler. Also, with Hitler dead, this has the potential to devastate political alliances. The impact of Hitler's premature death would have had huge repercussions, and this is the story of that particular what if. To reduce any confusion, I have almost entirely used American equivalent ranks when discussing the German military. Aside from being difficult to pronounce, the various military entities, the Waffen-SS, the Volkssturm, and the regular army, the Heer, all had their own terminologies for the same ranks. The word Wehrmacht has been generally but incorrectly identified with the army. Wehrmacht is the umbrella term for all three services: the Luftwaffe, Air Force, the Kriegsmarine, Navy, and the Heer, Army. Also, to the best of my knowledge, no such unit as the 74th Armored Regiment existed in the U.S. Army during World War II. And now, Himmler's War.
Chapter 1. The B-17G bomber was almost universally referred to as the Flying Fortress, and for good reason. Painted olive drab on top to blend with the ground below, and with a sky-blue belly for camouflage from enemies looking skyward, the bombers weighed more than 30 tons and bristled with 50-caliber machine guns. The designers at Boeing originally felt that each bomber would be able to defend itself against attacks by enemy fighters and still deliver up to 3 tons of bombs far into Germany. She could speed over Europe at nearly 300 miles an hour, had a range of nearly 2,000 miles, and could fly at an altitude of more than 35,000 feet. Everyone felt it was a hell of a plane. Like many well-laid plans, it didn't work out that way. Despite all her weapons, the bomber was vulnerable to attacks by German fighters, in particular the swift and deadly Messerschmitt 109G, a sleek single-engine fighter that savaged the formations when the bombers were required to fly without escorts. Since American fighters had much shorter ranges than the bombers, Nazi fighters often waited until escorts ran short of fuel and had to depart. The drop tank on the American P-51 fighter was supposed to stop that, and in large part it did. Range was extended, and bombers were better protected. But everything had gone
Sample complete. Ready to continue?